last fall about how we were going to try and get to a facilities decision. So tonight is sort of the first round of publicly talking about, or at least presenting, some of the options that our staff has been working the last several months to pull together. So hopefully it'll be just Mike tonight. I'm going to pass it off to Mr. Baker, and we'll all learn something. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mayor. Start over here and going through information up here on the whiteboard. This is essentially the information, if you read the staff report, that exists in that staff report document for this item. But we're here tonight to discuss the facility replacement and sustainability plan. This was referred to in the mayor's annual report presentation, one of the 6 priority action items that the council established during its long-range planning process last year. The goal with this project is to prepare a plan to construct a new combined police station and village hall on the Civic Center property, the property that we are on right now. The reason that we're pursuing this is because we have outdated, inadequate facilities, particularly a 40-year-old police station and 90-plus-year-old village hall. Among the deficiencies in these buildings, outdated major systems. These buildings do not support effective customer interactions, and in both buildings, they lack and do not meet accessibility standards. The schedule that we've outlined for the preparation of the plan includes discussion at the following meetings. We kicked it off back in December with an introduction to the project and confirmation of the process, schedule, and deliverables. We're here tonight, and I'll be presenting the scope, site plans, budget, financing plans for multiple options that the council can consider as we work towards development of the final plan. We'll come back in March on the 10th for further discussion of the options and more focused discussion of the overall project schedule, including the public input process that we would use as the plan is being implemented and building designs are being developed. We'll also at that meeting allow for some opportunity to discuss the budget as it relates to environmental sustainability attributes of the project. So we've carved out time at that March meeting for that topic as well. As we go into the month of April, we will, at the meeting on the 7th, identify and develop preferred options, work with the council to narrow down to the plan that's ultimately selected, and then approve the facility replacement and sustainability plan is targeted for the meeting of the 21st of April. So that lays out the schedule that we'll go through over the next couple of months. When completed, the plan will answer these questions. You can see them listed here on the board, and provide that set of deliverables. So let me briefly touch on a couple of those right now. The questions, what will be constructed and where will the construction take place, will be answered with the project scope, the space and parking program, the development partner scope, and preliminary site plans. And a lot of that information was prepared and put together in the staff report. So that scope includes a new combined police station village hall, parking for visitors, village and staff, as well as commuters. The plans replace all the existing commuter parking that exists on the Civic Center site right now. The program for the building anticipates between 69,000 and 75,000 square feet to meet the village's needs for the police station and village hall, with 292 parking spaces to accommodate all the users that I mentioned previously. In a minute, I'm going to walk through all of the site plans. I have those up on the monitor. But I wanted to briefly touch on the 6 options that you see listed here. And these are options that vary based on, in addition to the project scope that the village would construct to meet its needs, options for remaining portions of the site, ways to work with a potential development partner to provide some additional financial benefits and better use of the overall site. So the first option that you'll see would construct additional parking beyond what the requirements are to meet the village's needs with additional property available on the site. Option number 2 would involve partnering with the school districts. So we've District 58 or District 99, we've been having preliminary conversations with both of those districts. And under this option, the partnership would involve expanding the size of the village facility, the combined building, to accommodate one or potentially both of those partners in the building. It would also expand the parking lot area a little bit to accommodate, again, one or both of those users. Option 2A is one that we most recently evolved as we looked at the requirements to accommodate one of those school district partners. And we've determined that there is a scenario that would allow us to accommodate one of the two, either District 58 or District 99, as well as an apartment development on the site. Option 3 involves a partnership with an office developer. Option 4, partnering with a townhouse developer. Option 5, partnering with an apartment developer. Again, when I show you the site plans, you'll get a sense of where those developments would appear. Before I touch on the site plan options, I did want to highlight information that we had prepared and made available on our website that tried to emphasize key points related to this project. Obviously, it's one that the village has been studying for many years. As I indicated, we know that the police station and village hall are in need of replacement. Over time, the village council has looked at many different options and tried to come up with a solution. Ultimately determining that the replacement of the police station and village hall with a new building offers the best value for the community, and we provide information and ways for people in the community who want to participate, want to be involved, to do so. In addition to these key points, there's an extensive amount of archived and historical information for anybody who really wants to understand the history over the past several years. All right, so let me now walk through the site plans for each of those 6 options that I just briefly explained. And just to orient you, the railroad tracks up here, you can see Washington Street, and this area represents the Civic Center site with the Village Hall and the police station shown in dotted lines there. So in each of these site plans, you're going to see the property divided into 3 zones, Zone A, B, and C. Zone A represents improvements to the Washington and Burlington crossing area. This is an important attribute of the project that will allow us to make improvements that would address pedestrian and vehicular safety around the crossing and allow for a potential extension of Washington Street. We're not showing specifically what this would look like at this point, because there are multiple options that are being evaluated with the assistance of the traffic engineer. And the staff report did include, I think, the 6 different configurations that exist just for that intersection alone. So again, we want to analyze and work with a traffic engineer to prepare those a recommended preferred solution for Washington Street. But that is what's reflected here in Zone A. Zone B represents the portion of the property that would be dedicated for building construction, facilities shown here in red, and the parking on the property to meet the needs of customers and employees, and as well as official vehicles. We're showing parking along Curtis Street to meet the needs to replace the commuter parking that exists in Lot L, which is located right here. This is the option 1, that constructs the additional parking beyond what is required for the village use. So you can see that shown here in Zone C. So that's option 1.
Mike, for orientation, can you just indicate where the current buildings are?
It's a little tough to see on the screen. The Village Hall, I'm just going to go through the outline of the building. So here's the Village Hall building right here. The police station is right here. All right. Let's see. Option 2. Option 2 is the option where the village would partner with the school district. So in this option, it's very similar with same zone A, B, and C. The building, as I said, would expand, but the footprint wouldn't necessarily grow. A portion of the building would probably increase in elevation to accommodate an additional 7,500 to 8,500 square feet to bring on board one of the school district partners. And the parking lot expands a little slightly to the east. This area, Zone C, right now is just being shown as unimproved property at this point. This is what led us, and I'll jump right to option 2A, to determine, again, 2A is the same as I just described, building with a school district partner, the same parking field, and this option would allow for the construction of an apartment building, so the village partnering with an apartment developer to construct the building on the remaining portion of the property. Moving on to option 3. In the same zone organization that you saw earlier, this option for Zone C shows an office building with parking surrounding the office building. This option also, I'll point out, includes a use of a portion of the fleet maintenance garage parking lot where we would accommodate the commuter parking. So commuter parking needs addressed along Curtis Street and in that portion of the fleet maintenance garage parking lot. Option 4, showing a partnership, potential partnership with a townhome developer. So construction of townhome units in that Zone C portion of the site. And then option 5, partnership with an apartment developer. And this is showing an apartment building in that Zone C area larger than the apartment building that was shown in 2A, because we have a larger area to work with for the construction of that apartment development. So that's a brief summary of the site plans for each of the 6 options. I wanted to also summarize the financing plan that goes along with all of the options that I just described. Again, this table appears in the staff report. Let me start with this column that represents total development costs for the construction of the facility and village site improvements for each of the options. These figures represent the midpoint of the cost estimate range that was established for each of these options. So using the range of square footage, 69 to 75,000 square feet, as establishing the either end of the range. This figure represents the midpoint, right in the middle of that range. Village equity represents cash on hand, funds that the village has identified has been saving up for this project, and is funds that are available to pledge to this project. That would allow us to, this column represents the amount of bonds that would be issued, that issued for, to pay for the remainder of the project. So you can see the bond issues vary from $30.3 million to $31.8 million for option 1. Over 25 years of maturity on those bonds, this column represents the average annual debt service payment over that 25-year repayment schedule. So, a little under $2 million annually in debt service payments. This column represents the partner contributions for each of these options. Again, this represents the midpoint of the range that was identified for the partner contribution with one of the school district partners, $4.4 million. You can see this one, $6.8 million represents the $4.4 million, along with approximately $2.4 million in land sale for the apartment development project on that option 2A site. For the options that include a private development option, the village would put in place a tax increment financing or TIF district that would allow us to capture revenue, pledge it to the project. And these figures represent the average annual revenue collected in the form of tax increment financing over that 25-year period of time. And when we fully analyzed and looked at the revenues and the costs for all of the options, this column represents the gap, average annual gap over that 25-year period of time. So the amount that the village, what I need to identify in additional funding sources that have not currently been identified, they range from a low of approximately $100,000 a year if we were to pursue option 5, to the high end of the range here, about just under $600,000 a year if option 1 were pursued. As I indicated earlier, the next meeting will focus more deliberate discussion of the schedule. We did want to provide the sequence of the major milestones that would occur as the village move forward with the construction of the police station village hall portion of the project. You see, starting from design of the building, going through the phases that include zoning and entitlement, permitting, to construction of the building and some of the site improvements. One thing that we wanted to try to achieve, or that was critical with this project, is continuing to occupy the existing buildings, police station and village hall, while the construction of the building is underway, so that we do not need to go through temporary relocation of employees in both of these buildings. So that's why this portion of the project would include construction of the building and some of the site improvements. Moving into the new buildings from the existing police station and village hall would then take place, allowing for demolition of these existing buildings and construction of the remaining site improvements. So after we had gotten started with our portion of the project, we would begin, if the council selected one of the private sector redevelopment options, we would go through a process of selecting a development partner, preparing and negotiating a redevelopment agreement, going through the process of zoning and entitlement, and then ultimately coordinating construction of that project to begin after the final phase of the village's project. So that is a summary of where we're at in the project right now. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mike. So importantly, tonight was intended to be sort of a first presentation of all this. As you can see up there, our next meeting is really designed and intended to be a meeting where we sit and go through and ask a lot of questions. If there were any that people had immediately, certainly we entertain kind of taking those down and taking note of them. But what we need to do as a council, and what we hope residents will do as well, is begin to process and digest this information. What we decided, this portion here, the scope question was decided last fall. We did two things last fall. We decided on that scope, and we decided on this timeline. So now we're working through the timeline. And tonight really is intended to just get this stuff on the table and let us all start processing it. So we'll start with the council. If you guys have any particular questions, obviously we're here tonight, so we'll talk. But remember that what we want to do is start really digesting this stuff in detail. So has anybody got anything that jumps out at them that they need? Really, I think clarification of what was presented tonight is kind of our goal, as opposed to discussion of details. Rich?
So the difference between 2A and 5, as I understand it, is 5 allows a larger apartment complex building, and then that creates more TIF revenue.
That is correct. A larger building and no school district partner.
Okay,
So
so
option 5.
if and when we partner with the school district, does that, are we planning on having a pump out of some 7,500 square feet, or could we also add a floor instead? And
I think the intention was the theoret. I mean, we're a long ways away from drawings, right? But I think, Mike, jump in if I'm wrong, but I think the issue there was we intended to go up, but the additional square footage compelled us to have additional parking.
Okay.
That's why the available extra site, if you will, shrunk a little.
Okay.
Any other, Kavanaugh, please?
I just have a quick question. When we started this reset of the planning process, we talked about kind of turning the process upside down a little bit, where the village drives and partners come on board. Does 2A kind of give us that control that we felt like we didn't have going through the process before, in terms of when we get to that place in the process for a development partner?
Yes, it does. All the options give us that control. And regardless of which of the options are chosen, they all allow us to proceed based on this phasing and approach.
And then stagger in.
That allow the village project to really go first
Okay.
and be designed, and then bring on a private development partner later at a later stage.
Council, clarification kinds of things at this point? Okay, let's move over to our residents. You guys have also seen this for the first time. So if you got a question, I'll kind of acknowledge you, stand up so everybody can hear you, and realize that what we may be doing is taking notes and getting back to you. So go ahead.
Patrick Comer. A question about the scope. It says improvements to Washington-Burlington Crossing, and I don't see development partner scope, the RTA or the BNSF in that list, because I'm wondering if several of these options include putting more people on this site. How do these people get to the train station from those apartment or townhouse buildings? I don't see any indication that they could walk to the train station. It looks like they'd be walking through a parking lot. Is that right? And does the RTA or the BNSF have any way to provide to help with that kind of? And I assume that's what you mean when you say Washington-Burlington Crossing, that some kind of money would be helped with from the railroad people.
So I think no and yes, and good questions. How about that? If you check the online version of this stuff that's here tonight, the Washington-Burlington Crossing commentary is largely designed to allow us to reconfigure our portion of that crossing. The crossing will stay where it is and operate the way it is, but what happens streetwise after that and sidewalk-wise after that is kind of up to us to have an opportunity to reconfigure. If you spend a lot of time at that crossing in either of the rush hours, it's chaos. It's people and cars everywhere, and nobody's sure what they're supposed to do. And so we're looking for a way to thank you. These are in the online stuff, and like much of this, these are a lot of sort of theories at this point. And Mike alluded earlier that we're having traffic engineers help us sort through this. But this is what's being talked about. Now, the question, how would people get from potential partner development over there, is something that we're still working on. Go ahead, Dave.
Can I just jump in and plan back up for the option 1, please?
Yeah. Let me hang on one second, Dave. One more thing about the, and as far as other involvement from the RTA or BNSF, we will continue to ask that question. We're sort of not thinking that right now. Go ahead.
So this question of improving pedestrian access through the site and to the train platform is absolutely driving the site plan concepts. And we'll get more into that public discussion when we get to the design aspects of Washington the tracks. But from all of us who sit in these buildings, we know that not only do we have commuter parkers in Lot L that are currently here trying to get over here, we also have all sorts of residents in the Whittier neighborhood that come through our Village Hall site. So one of the design aspects was to make it safer and easier for those groups to get to the train station platform. So these site plans all, as Mike was saying earlier, show commuters parking on the southern portion of this property. And then what we're trying, and what they all show is sidewalk connections that would take them here and then up through whatever it is we design in that Washington Zone A. Pedestrian connectivity in a safe manner in Zone A is something we're trying to achieve, and we'll talk more about as we go forward. There's also pedestrian affordances, sidewalks through the middle portion of the site and actually through the building. Through the building. If you look on these, you'll see that if you're a commuter here and you want to walk through this up on the sidewalk and then through a lobby in and out, you could go continue on through. So the whole idea of trying to get people from their commuter spots up through this platform, which is where they're trying to go safely, is what's driving this site plan.
Okay, but if I'm in an apartment building in Zone C near the tracks, I'm not going to walk that way. I'm going to take the shortest, straightest line. And
We
that's
agree.
right through the parking lot.
We agree. And so there's a pedestrian affordance right here, sidewalk, right there, and through the building and up.
So
That's why it goes through the building, because we don't want to have people go around.
So there's nothing along the
why is there nothing along the track?
Because this zone here, on the north side here, is an area that is protected from the public because it has sensitive police work going on there. The police cars are all parked there, they're fenced off, etc. This is an area that we do not want the pedestrians going, so we've designed it all so they start here and then come up through this way.
The other thing that should be thought of is that this whole thing right now, the chaos is there. We're trying to find ways to, for the focus on pedestrian safety, as Dave's talked about, alleviate some of that. And part of that, frankly, is redirecting people. If right now, if you stand right here some morning and sorry, don't do that.
Same choice. Look at that. That's fantastic.
If you stand right here and watch, what you'll see is literally it's ants everywhere. And there's people walking down in the grass, just upside the curb here. There's people walking through the parking lot. There's people crossing this diagonally. We're going to try and clean some of that up. So what's the Zone A stuff that Dave's talking about, a lot of the design focus here is going to be on trying to get those pedestrians to here safely. It's not complete yet.
Keep in mind, I just went through a ton of detail here. These are still preliminary. These are designed to help the council make a decision and envision the project. Once the council tells us the answers to these questions, then we start doing site planning. So these are not set in stone by any means. They're just concepts to help drive decisions.
Right, my concern in this phase of the process is if you're talking about apartment buildings, you automatically assume cars and roads. But when you talk about people, you don't automatically assume sidewalks and safe access. That's what I see.
I hope that we did exactly the opposite of that. We designed this from the staff minor and traffic engineer with the safety of the pedestrians as the #1 priority.
Okay.
The important thing is that what Dave just said is what we'll be driving. So as the traffic engineers work on it, if we get to the point where we feel like we're going forward with a plan and we start actually having paid people working on site design, pedestrian safety is going to be a top priority, irrespective of what version of this thing comes together. The Washington situation and the amount of pedestrians that are trying to get to that metro service are going to be a top priority in whatever a final design lays out like.
Thank you.
Other kind of clarifying stuff, go ahead.
Yeah.
One of you guys jump up.
I applaud the forethought you're giving to the pedestrian safety and traffic concerns. And I would just like to say we have a lot of people here that have environmental concerns as well. It would be really nice if we could have the same level of forethought in terms of environmental concerns around this new facility, which is, you know, a great opportunity to incorporate things that, you know, that would really help us going forward, you know, and we're gonna be stuck with it for like 50, 60, you know, 80 years.
Better be.
I hope we don't feel like we're stuck.
You know, the fact that there was no allowance built in to this planning for any kind of sustainability feature, and it seems like it's being done kind of an afterthought. Just appearance,
We just
as
have-
I understand
yeah,
it.
that's-
It would be great
Yeah,
if
we're
we
not
could see some of
there.
that in this
So-
presentation.
So we are on 218, and we will be talking about that on 310. Assuming that there's no allowance because it hasn't been talked about is not accurate. What it has is hasn't gotten too many. It's, there is nobody on this council and nobody on this staff that has any interest in ignoring everything from best practices to innovation as it results to environmental concerns for this building. We're just not at that stage yet.
Yeah, well, what I said, there was no allowance, so that was in that plan, there was a statement that there was no allowance. I mean, it also said you're going for a...
Because we
for a
haven't
grant.
got there. You remember Mr.
Okay.
Baker talking about midpoint on a range?
Mhm.
There are millions
Okay.
on either side of those range. And make sure you're here next
Oh, we will
month.
be.
Next month. And be paying attention to all the documents we continue to put on online. There will be, you know, I'm gonna get way ahead of myself, but let's say we go ahead and decide to do this. The 7 of us aren't gonna figure out exactly how to build this building. We're gonna hire an architect. And we're not gonna pick a guy who does tip-up buildings for a living as warehouses. We're gonna pick somebody, one of the 15 or 20 architects in Chicagoland that for the last 15 years has been doing municipal buildings. It's not like those guys are gonna come to us and say, have you guys thought about environmental issues? It's just not gonna be the way it goes. So we're putting allowances in. We're gonna talk about some of that in March further. And when we get to the point where we're actually at that stage, we will be including those to be part of our conversations. And just like anybody else, there'll be conversations that this group has about options.
So FGM is not necessarily the architect that's going to be used?
No, there's no, we're so far from having an
Okay,
architect.
because that was on the drawing, so I didn't know if they'd already mentioned.
We've talked with people, probably 4 or 5 companies over the last 20 years as we've developed all of our information. We're moving forward. We do not have an architect selected by any stretch. We don't even have a project in front of us. We're trying to figure out if we think we can afford it, and if we think with what we can afford, it makes sense.
We have engaged an architect at this point to help us with site plan, preliminary footprints, preliminary building design, and preliminary cost estimating. However, that does not mean that we picked an architect for the project. In fact, when you look back at our history, one previous time when we thought we were moving forward, we actually switched architects at the front end of the project.
Thanks for clarification. Laura, go ahead, sure.
Laura Hoyce, the apartment scenario in concept, would that contemplate on-site parking for the apartments within the building space? Or would the parking for the apartment residents need to utilize the parking area, paved parking area?
It assumes parking in the lower level or first level of the building.
What about guest parking in that scenario? Would the parking lot be available for guests?
We would look for ways to accommodate guest parking around the
That's
site,
often a problem.
potentially in a shared parking arrangement with the village.
Go ahead. You have a question?
She took my question.
Oh.
Stole my question over there.
Related to that, there are village ordinances that require on-site parking for residential units. Guest parking is a question. It's one that we juggle, basically constantly juggle. But there are accommodations all over downtown for guests that are in our downtown facilities, and there are zoning requirements for on-site parking for all of them. But
Is there a projected height for the village building?
projected height or protected height?
Projected.
Projected
How
height.
tall is it going to be?
What's our thoughts right now? 3?
That is showing a 2-story building with a basement, partial basement and 2 stories off ground.
For the village building.
The village building.
And the partner developments in order, the office building would be 3 stories. So picture Charles Place, which is the 3-story office building just north of the parking deck in the downtown, right? So that is the model we use for the office building. For the townhomes, those were 2.5-story type townhomes. Think Georgian Courts, right, on the west side of our downtown. And the 2 apartments in version 2A That footprint for the site plan in 2A is exactly the apartment at Forest and the tracks, south side of the tracks, Burlington Station. And the larger one in option 5 is somewhere in between the footprint of Burlington Station, what I just talked about, and the apartment at Main and Maple, with units ranging from 85 apartment units in option 2A to 100 in option 5. And those are 5-story, right?
Yeah,
5-story apartments.
Parking and 4 stories of.
So Village Hall would be 2 or 3, an office building would likely be 3, and apartments would be somewhere in the 4 or 5 neighborhood. And, I mean, you know, at this really rough stage of things, right? But that's, to get some sort of a footprint, what might it look like? We've gone with some things that have happened downtown and would fit on the footprint and within our zone.
Do we know the occupancy rate of those Burlington Station apartments, and is there additional demand for additional apartments here?
I don't want to give you real specifics, but they're basically all full.
Okay.
And yes, we believe the demand exists.
And I know, obviously, you're looking at traffic patterns for that one street. Given another 100 units there, is that going to impact downtown traffic significantly, or is that something to start worrying about?
We would worry about it if we got to the point of wanting to do that, we'd do a traffic study and decide if that caused us to limit the units or the size of the building. And we would certainly be considering it.
You can't widen the streets.
No, you know, but here's the thing, just to give everybody a little bit of insight, this is my house. And I've been there since 1998. And so one thing I've seen is, I don't know what the number is, but between Marquis on Maple and Main and Maple, I've seen a huge number of new units, and there's no impact, guys. There probably is, like 60 more cars instead of 8,800 cars, it's now 8,860, it's that kind of a thing. We would certainly go through the process, we absolutely worry about it, and we would be driving, anybody, partner or developer we're working with would have to go through the exercise of actually modeling all that up. And we would, if we felt like those models told us so, we would end up limiting ourselves. Other kind of, jump up, David.
Can you elaborate a little bit on the impact of the partnering with school districts, both in terms of timing and in terms of impact on whatever plans would be put in place? And what variables they're considering in our own?
You want to hit that? I'm gonna make Dave do that, because I just want to be as accurate as possible. And the reason, guys, I'm doing that is because they're another government entity that is not committed and is doing their own due diligence in the process, and I just want to be really thoughtful about what's said because of that.
We approached both school districts with an opportunity to partner. School District 58, our great school district, they have previously spoke of, currently speaking of, and will continue to speak about their concerns and issues related to Longfellow, where they have administrative operations, and their administrative services center building on 63rd Street by Indian Trail School. That is an issue that is front and center to them. They will be addressing that on a time frame which I suspect will be very similar to the village's time frame. I further suspect that they will start talking about those issues later this month. District 99, we've had preliminary discussions with the high school district. I do not believe, based on our preliminary discussions, that they have an eminent pressing need on their administrative center, and that this was the partnership would allow for that type of building sharing. So there's no particular schedule. We've made this offer to both superintendents. They're working with their boards. 58 is the one that I think might have a better timing alignment than 99. If the council directs us to continue to pursue option 2 or 2A, we will then get with those school districts and figure out a detailed level of their interests, and then develop a shared schedule and come back and report it to the council.
Thank you.
What's the front-facing part of the new building, the new village hall? What's the front-facing end? Where's the front door?
Where's the front door?
Right now, the initial schemes have 2 front doors, if you will, one facing Zone A, Washington Street area, one facing to the east, interior to the parking lots. The concept here is this is what an urban planner or a designer might call a three-sided building, that it needs to look like a front on at least 3 of the sides. And I suspect when we get into designing this building, some will argue that it needs to be a 4-sided building with all elevations equally attractive to be viewed from all 4 sides. But the doors right now for functionality, one on the west side, one on the east side for public entrances.
Thank you. Please.
Hi. Why wouldn't they make it a parking garage, since parking is such a, in Zone C?
Economics, $35,000 to $40,000 per space.
Versus?
$10,000 a space for surface parking.
We just went through the downtown parking study, and that some of that documentation is online also, and our parking and traffic committee are working on that. But one of the things that was initially at least sort of thought about was that same question, right? What about on a parking deck somewhere? They're just really, really expensive. For the actual amount of spaces that you end up with, the amount of usable spaces, they are really, really expensive.
And to maintain.
And it doesn't stop.
Not only that, the parking studies seem to say that there's actually adequate parking in the downtown area. You just have to know where to look. Obviously, there's more work to be done by the Traffic and Parking Commission as we digest all of this. But the parking is there, even at peak demand times.
Please.
Thanks for the clarification about when the architect, an architect hasn't been selected for this project yet, because we're not at that stage yet. And I noticed one of the questions is, when will the project take place? But I was curious about, so after this plan is approved, following the timeline in April, then how soon after that is the architect selected, and what's that process look like, just briefly?
So we need the answer from this council to tell us when.
Glad it works there, Vera. But, you know, if we decided, I think the general thought is if we decided in April that we had a plan we wanted to go on, and that we were in control of that timing, then we would be moving as quickly as we could to do each of those things. But there's no skipping some of those steps, right? I mean, some of those things just have to be done, and they take some time. But just selecting an architect is not instant. So it really kind of hinges on the decision we make in April. Are we doing it or not? But then if we do, we'll be moving as quickly as we can. David?
Is the logic of this such that the decision-making on your part and on the village's part amounts to a rank ordering, if you will? Meaning a first choice, a second choice, a third choice, so that if for some reason the first choice doesn't pan out, then there's the second choice? Or is there one choice and that's what we shoot for?
The wording we've used has been preferred option. The goal is to get to a preferred option. Doesn't answer your question, and I don't think that we've collectively talked about whether we're going to pursue this as, you know, our favorite and then everybody ranking the rest of them. The goal in our mind right now, the process that we've structured, has been designed to lead us to a preferred option. We'll have to see between the next 3 meetings if we get there or not.
So the staff is looking for one preferred option based on one of the lessons learned in our history, is when we had multiple development proposals, it became very difficult to sort of compare apples and oranges and make that decision. We're hopeful that we will provide enough information to this council that they can give us the preferred option. Now, the other thing that's great about the way we've approached this site plan is that for most of these options, Zone C, the potential development partner option, is exactly the same. So if we had a preferred option that included a development partner from the private sector, and for whatever reason that didn't pan out, does not affect the site plan in 5 of the 6 options, right? So we could pursue, it's a puzzle piece. You can insert the next one, next preferred, if it doesn't pan out.
Well, I was also thinking of the case, again, going back to the school district situation that you described, that you have District 58 potentially as a partner, then if for some reason the council should say, yeah, we want to go with District 58, that's presumably contingent on you knowing ahead of time that District 58 agrees with that intention, does it not?
Yeah, it does, because when we design a building, there's only so much of that building we can design without knowing for sure if the school district is in. We would like to know very early in the process whether we have that partner or not. However, even in that scenario, the footprint of the building does not change. It's just how big is the second story, how far does it extend over the first floor. The other thing is just if we had the site plan up, it's one row of parking. The school districts need 30 to 40 spaces. It just so happens that says one more bank of parking. So we have built in flexibility to scenarios if we lose or gain a partner or something doesn't work out. We've tried to narrow the impact of the design of the building and the design of the site so that we can still proceed if something goes wrong.
So is that dependent on District 99 whatsoever, or there is flexibility even on that one?
If we ended up with this council saying pursue option 2 and both school districts saying yes, we have to do a little bit more planning on the building and the site. They each need 30 to 40 parking spaces extra. Just the law of averages, we only showed an option that showed one of the two. I think it's a long shot to get both.
That's what I'm hearing, that's what I was wondering.
One of the things that we've done, you ask about logic and preferred 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One of the things that we've tried to rotate a little bit in this, as compared to years past and shots at this in the past, is prioritizing us. We talked about it. I mentioned tonight. We're a service delivery organization. Our police department, our water department, our permitting groups. We're needing to take care of those needs so we can continue to deliver the services at the levels that our residents expect in an efficient manner that we believe can be 50 or 60-year answer. And so the flexibility Dave talks about is because we are sort of whittling down to what do we think it's going to end up being, but it all sort of starts from a different spot, as opposed to if we can get an apartment building, we could do, or if we can get a partner, we could do. What we're saying is this is what we need to do. Now let's figure out how to either minimize the cost or expand the serviceability or whatever, but we're sort of starting from a little different, you ask about logic, it's a little different logical starting point.
So if District 99 doesn't have an answer by the time the village is ready to go, they're out. That's their problem.
That's one way.
Yes, sir.
This is a neat.
But that ship will have sailed. They'll be on the dock, perhaps.
Please.
My name's Diane, and I'm just wondering, what's the likelihood of just leaving Zone C as a green zone of some sort, some sort of park, some sort of wooded area, just leaving it and not putting an apartment or anything on there?
It was one of our choices. As you see, it's one of the options. The likelihood of all the options is about the same as it sits today.
Is it?
What this group will have to do, if we got to the point where we were asking ourselves, I think probably the idea of somehow partnering with another government entity to somehow reduce our costs is a very appealing thing. Partnerships are really important across government agencies. That whole thing doesn't pan out, then it comes down to a question of how much are we willing to spend. I mean, that Zone C ends up being essentially a financing tool, or not. But at this stage of the game, it's sitting there with the other 5.5 options or 4.5 options, just the same as the other.
It just seems like we have had done so much construction on townhouses and apartments, and it just seems like we have enough of that.
There's a demand for them. B, they potentially finance a lot of things. So there's green space is something that we're certainly aware of and is a priority, and we are not ignoring it, which is why you see it as one of the options. You don't get any more. I'm kidding, David. Go ahead, please. That's why we're here.
Just space comparison, this space compared to the space that exists now?
Mr. Baker.
The existing, the building.
Yeah.
The space of these two buildings is not that dissimilar overall. However, the police department we've established is far smaller than it needs to be. It's about 26,000 square feet. The program calls for about 49 43 to 44,000 square feet of the new building to be dedicated for police use. This building has much more space than we need, and therefore the new building calls for a smaller sort of footprint for Village Hall. Obviously, it begs the question about whether these could be buildings, the uses could be swapped. We've looked at that. This building is really just not suited at all for any kind of police operation.
So did I hear the total space is similar, it's just the distribution?
Distribution is vastly different than
Thank you.
currently.
So the Village Hall versus police is not an assigned space in your orange area. There is no assigned, this is the police park, this is the Village Hall park.
There's a total square footage.
Right.
Yeah.
We've conceptualized it with the help of an architect to help drive the footprint and planning. So yes, there are spaces within that building footprint that are solely for police use, and there are areas that are solely for the use of village staff, and there are areas that are shared among police staff and other village department staff.
In this scheme, where would be the police egress for their vehicles?
Helicopter. Did we get a new police helicopter? Where's our finance team? This parking lot here is labeled Village Police Station Secured Parking. It would be for police officers' private cars. It would also be for our squad cars in this fenced area here in this parking lot. The building itself would allow for additional squad car parking inside the building and for prisoner entry and exit in the building, a thing called a sally port. If you look at the site plan, there's a double sally port entrance here that circulate inside the building and come out here. Right? So that's how the police would enter as far as vehicles. There also is a police staff entry right here labeled on the site plan, on the floor plan. And then the other staff entrance for non-police staff is right here at the end of the sidewalk.
So in an emergency, the police cars are in the back of the lot. They have to drive out of the whole lot south to get out past the cars and the people who are there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we provide in all these concepts multiple points so that if one's blocked, there's other options.
Dave, how often in an emergency would a police car be leaving from the police station?
It's incredibly rare because police are all constantly patrolling in their zones.
But if it happens once, it's going to be in the newspaper.
Yes, sir. Right. So the types of people that are in the police station that are not patrolling are people who are usually not the first to arrive on a scene. They're lieutenants and higher.
That's pretty much what goes on now. If you think about our spot, our police are just not sitting here working. They're driving, working. If police end up leaving from here, they are the third or fourth person typically, and they still have to leave out, a bunch of residential streets past a bunch of parked or stopped cars. Other questions? There are plenty of opportunities still ahead of us. Make sure you stay in touch and stay connected to this process. Rich, did you have something else?
I did have a couple of questions. Because parking is tied to this, do we have any estimate and when the Transportation and Parking Commission will be making the recommendations regarding the parking study?
They start that discussion in April, and we're going to focus the staff presentation to them is going to focus first on the better use of existing parking resources, including signage and wayfinding and changes in our permitting and processing. So I would say probably summer is the time the council would see any type of implementation plan or recommendations from TAP about downtown parking study.
Okay. And this question might be premature, but because it relates to the Washington Street crossing in Burlington, in option number 2 where it shows Washington coming straight out, would that envision us actually closing Burlington, and could we turn that into green space?
Yeah, so one of those 6 options that we've identified is exactly that, the idea of Washington Street just coming straight through. with no connection to Burlington here at all, right? To minimize the conflicts between cars and people at that point, to make it safer, but still allow traffic to go through. If that happens, we have a design opportunity here, right? So maybe you take this privately owned parking lot that serves the apartment building here, and you just let them connect to Washington Street Extended. You close this, right? And so now you have an opportunity for some kind of plaza space.
Good question.
Thanks.
Kevin?
Just one more quick question. I think when we introduced the new apartment options, my mind initially went to a question that was posed a second ago. Have we reached this satiation place for apartments to understand, there's still that demand there? With the success of the residential space that's come online, and not to fast forward at all, have we gotten contacted at all?
Yes.
Okay, that was kind of my question, or would we get to a place in the bid process, but folks have reached out to us?
Yeah, yes and yes. So let's just tell a little bit of background information about the two apartment buildings that were built a couple years ago. Commissioner Earl, at the time, a couple years ago, was very interested in how they performed in the market. And so we've been monitoring that. And both of those buildings are 100% leased. And they're leased at rental rates that are higher than those developers projected. In fact, the Main and Maple apartment building just sold for what I think is just an enormous amount of money, which reflects the value of those properties and how strong the rental market is. You talk to Michael Castle, you talk to Jason and Stan, they will tell you that there are apartment developers contacting us constantly looking for the next 100-unit apartment building. We get informally asked, did the council pick the apartment option yet? They want to know. So the demand is high, the interest is extremely high.
Okay. Go ahead, you got it. I'm just giving you a hard time. Please,
I appreciate it.
feel free.
In December, it struck me that I raised, and I thought Commissioner Earl chimed in on the idea that at some point in the past, there was the notion of exploring part of the space being dedicated or being sized so that it could be available for use as a public meeting space of some sort or other. Is that possibility still available with any of the discussion or is that now precluded from whatever discussions have taken place?
So first of all, nothing is precluded, because if the council wants to talk about any changes to anything anytime, then that's our prerogative. The numbers and the scope that you see here, 69,000 square feet to 75,000 square feet, does not include a performing arts center. What we did, based on Commissioner Earl's and others' questions from the December meeting, is staff read the report from 2004, 2005-ish, summarized it for each council member individually. And what we found is that report was very preliminary and did not have any square footage recommendations, etc. We just said, you know what, for now, we'll program it at 69 to 75,000, and if at this meeting somebody wants to talk about adding or changing that, we'd be open to doing that.
Can I add a little bit to that? It also had no real idea of demand in the marketplace. It had no idea on how to finance it. To call it a rough sketch, I think, is really the best way to describe it.
Marijuana sales.
All right, now you're done.
Meeting's over.
Okay, I think so. Hang on, so just a minute, Marge.
I think that one other thing is an option of what if you kind of combine the apartment building with green space instead of making it a whole 100. I mean, has that ever been looked at as another option? Do we have to have it be edge to edge?
So that could be an option. By the time, Mike, if you could pull up option, let's say, just option 1 maybe. So option 1 in Zone C is just additional parking, and it's 1.65 acres in area. There's a concept that you could put a smaller apartment on this, maybe that 85 unit apartment. Using my best guesses as a former urban planner, I will tell you that it doesn't offer a lot of opportunity for sort of meaningful green space in one area. It probably allows you to put some more green space for sure, sort of around the edges of the building. That could be an option if the council said, you know, we want to cut down the number of units, et cetera. We could do so. There is sort of a minimum threshold for apartments in the modern economy. I think fewer than 85 would pose a problem to apartment developers to get the economies of scale they're looking for and get it to match up with rents, et cetera. So that's, but it could be done, and the smaller you make it, the probably less financially viable it'll be for the apartment development community.
Would it be true too that you would start to run into some parking challenges? Underground parking is expensive, and so unless there's a lot of units to support it, it probably isn't going to be there.
Yeah, apartment building at the 400 level, sort of the relationships to how fast you can lease something, how much it costs to build the units, how much it costs to build the parking, the floor plates, they all line up. There's this sort of sweet spot, and we've seen it done twice in our downtown. If you start messing with that formula, the economics become very challenging. So that's why 85 becomes sort of a magic number, and the floor plate for interior parking becomes an issue.
So we're real rough numbers here, but one thing too to keep in mind is that, and this is going to sound like something an elected guy shouldn't say, but if you look at that table that Mr. Baker put up there, the annual gap, that kind of far right column, this is going to be a decision that we make about values and priorities. We've got a lot of models here that get us to a relatively small number. That kind of money, $500,000 a year is a lot of money, right? No doubt. It's also not a lot of money when you're talking about your police service, your code enforcement service, your permit service, your water service for 50 or 60 or 70 years. And so, Sue, the reason I bring that up is because the questions about the green space, you know, one of the options is to just leave that as green space. The whole spread here is $500,000.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm looking at.
You know, so it becomes a question that we will have to beat through over the next couple of months.
Yeah.
But it becomes sort of a values and priorities, and what do you want your downtown to become? I mean, there's various things that weave into that. We're not alone as we build our building, but it's a pretty narrow band. Rich?
There's a grayed out elephant in the room on the right side of it. And I don't know, I think this council is embracing the idea that we should build this building to last for perhaps 75 or 100 years. I mean, in Europe, they have municipal buildings that are 400 or 500 years old because they can build them that way. And so we don't have to go back to the well, you know, when my great-grandchildren are sitting in this chair. Do we envision fleet maintenance being there for another 75 years, or might we be able to do something in shorter order?
So if you were to pick a place to build the location and facility to maintain the village's fleet of trucks and vehicles, this is probably one of the last places you would pick as far as urban planning and land use compatibility. However, this is where it was built because this is the land we had. I think all of us would like to move this to some sort of industrial park near Public Works, something like that, or maybe a shared building with a neighboring community where we can enjoy a partnership and lower our overall costs. So we don't think it'll be here forever, but in the short run to medium run, we think it will be here. One of the great things about the way we've approached this site plan, first allows us to only move once, right, so we can continue to operate here. The second thing it does is it puts Zone C, a development option, right up next to a building that we think in the future may not be here for decades and decades. And so it creates the opportunity to sort of phase a development or series of developments for the whole eastern portion of this site.
And from what I understand about the far eastern portion of that, that's not buildable. That's going to have to be greenland or wetlands, maybe?
Yeah, you get down into here,
yeah.
And you get into some floodplain issues, right?
Can you expand on that floodplain, because some of the other plans have you putting additional parking right there?
Yeah, you can park in floodplains.
Okay, that's not gonna.
Yeah, it's, I don't even mean flip.
Where's that water gonna go?
I didn't mean to sound flippant. I apologize.
Exactly where it goes now.
Roll up the windows.
In fact, one of the, I again, didn't mean to sound flippant, but one of the things here with parking lots is it's a development at the surface, and it's actually for movable objects, vehicles, and so most codes in the United States allow for parking to happen in flood areas. In fact, there's many areas in town that not only are floodplains where they have parking areas, but intentionally store water, put detention basins in the parking lot, and there'll even be signs that says, hey, in heavy rain events, this parking lot will fill with X number of inches of water on purpose. And so that's why these plans right now show us have the ability to park there.
It's a good question. It's also a little bit of a rabbit trail because paved parking lots and streets are great places to put stormwater, as long as you manage the system in such a way that they go down in a predictable amount of time quickly.
I do have one question. Does any of this fall on top of the creek?
The creek, Mike.
The creek crosses
He's not so
underneath
flippant.
the railroad track just to the east of the corner of the property. I believe, geez, the screen really is jumping tonight. Creek runs, I believe runs along the southern property line and then along Curtis. I'm getting head nods from our community development staff, so
And how
I
big is
don't
that
believe
pipe?
any of the construction activity actually is on top of the creek. But obviously,
How big
fairly
is
close
that pipe?
proximity. 11-foot diameter pipe.
So we're not building anything there?
No.
Not building.
Is it an ephemeral creek, is that what you're saying?
St. Joseph Creek?
St. Joseph
St.
Creek.
Joseph's Creek.
Goes
Okay.
behind Whittier, right?
Unless people are jumping out of their seat, I'm hoping to wrap up. Go ahead, David.
I know this is getting way ahead, but given the opening of the discussion about where the fleet maintenance building is it even appropriate to anticipate the possibility of what could be done with that, and then have that influence the decision here? For example, that it may be worthwhile to go with putting parking in Zone C for the time being, because then that creates some additional flexibility for what could be done with the fleet maintenance space later on, as opposed to something in the way of sticking an apartment building there and then having to somehow factor that into what could be done with fleet maintenance space.
It's part of the conversation we had that caused us to kind of go down this road of having sort of these zones, because we wanted to preserve some flexibility there. There also are some realities that we're grappling with about what it takes to get a project done. If we include District 58 and we include District 59, and we want to do another government partnership with a facility, we start to build a Jenga pile that we can't pull the pieces out of in any kind of reasonable shape. So I think, as Dave said, everybody here is saying to themselves, that's the worst place for that. And so let's figure out how we can site plan and work a process that allows that flexibility sort of at the end for that very reason. We're going to do our stuff first. If we look over here, and that far right side of that board with the arrows on it, one of the intentional aspects of this was to be doing our work first. So that is, I think it was mentioned earlier, one possibility was if one development doesn't work, you could plug another one in. Well, the same is true. You could also decide to hold off because you had another opportunity. But vetting those out in such an ambiguous space, asking somebody whether they want to participate in a development we don't know anything about, is pretty tough to get meaningful decision making. So we've set it up in such a way that we're going to do our part first and leave that flexibility continuously moving east, if you will. It's a good question. We'll be talking about it tomorrow. Marge?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead with your thought, because I'm going to change the subject.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of cap that off. We made a very conscious decision not to deal with fleet right away because of the complexity that it adds. We have a lot of work to do, and I think, to the mayor's point, we all want to do that piece of it eventually, just not right now.
I mean, that could easily add, what, a year to this whole thing? Maybe even more? Yeah.
No, I
So-
wasn't saying to it. I was just saying it strikes me as a factor that may influence either public reception of what would be appropriate, and
Yeah.
your perspective on what would be appropriate.
Yeah, it's clearly forward-thinking. That's something that we design in those 3 sections, wouldn't be impacted if we have to move that out.
Related to that, as given the discussion of green space, the other far-out question that I would ask is it even remotely appropriate to think of exposing St. Joseph Creek at that place and make that a foundation for a green space area so that it's a stream running through there rather than a buried pond?
Yeah. Like a creek walk instead of a river walk? I thought about that a lot.
Dave's going to give you a non-flippant, good quality answer. I'm going to give you a flippant one. It's a 12-foot pipe we haven't looked at in decades, and given the scope of the project and Curtis Avenue and the apartment buildings and the work on the north side of the tracks that features St. Joe's Creek as well, I personally have zero interest in going down that road, because you'd be exposing what you're talking about. You'd be exposing 200 or 300 feet of creek that you'd have to dump right back in unless you were going to remove Curtis Street. And so there's some, would we have a nice? Sorry, it's a really short window. So it comes underneath the tracks, and then it has to be handled in such a way that it appropriately enters a closed environment by the time you get to Curtis. So we're talking about a really short window, and the cost and timing associated with such a thing would be, in my mind, just way the opposite of worth it.
Not to mention the regulations, the stormwater regulations that go along with that, all the wetland regulations. The one thing that, the little green dot, proposed location of new tower there, the one thing that's missing from this is the big old radio tower is gone, and we're going to be relocating what that was, maybe just to a pole, which would be so much more visually pleasing. How did we decide that's where we were going to stick it, or did we just stick that in there as a placeholder for the moment, or does it maybe, I keep visioning it all the way in the corner, but maybe that's not doable because they have to maintain it. I don't know, so I was just wondering why we stuck it there.
A couple of reasons. One, to Commissioner Earle's point, right here currently there's a lattice pole that has village communication, including communications among our buildings, police and fire communications internally, and emergency communications throughout DuPage County as part of a regional dispatch center, plus 3 private sector telephone and data carriers. So other than that, it's a pretty straightforward tower. This is not only an element of communication for us in the region, for public safety and public service, but it's also a service to our community because of the phone providers there, and it's also a significant revenue generator. So that tower needs to be replaced somewhere on the site. We've also learned, we've already hired a communication tower specialist. The way the public safety communications work is we can never be at even one moment without it. So we're not in a position where we can shut one off and then just quickly turn another one back on. You have to just seamlessly switch. So what that means is we actually have to build all new communication, emergency communication system anyway, just for the new buildings, right? So then that leaves us with the question of where do we put the tower? Well, at least there's a couple options. One, we might be able to slide it back right in here, where it is now. We might be able to move it anywhere sort of along this back corner. Why did we pick right there? This tower will be hardwired to 2 buildings that will remain on the site. One is this building here, the Fleet building. The other one is our new building here, hardwired for communication purposes. So you don't want to stick it all the way back over here because you're raising your cost because of the hardwire, right? But we also thought, boy, you don't want to stick it right here or anywhere over here because if we do have a development opportunity, you really don't want to be looking at that unless you have to. So we're trying to get the maximization of view corridors, but keeping it and then lowering the cost of actually stringing the wires to connect up all the buildings, right?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And the other concern about moving it further to the east is that we didn't want to have it close to the residential property that fronts along Maple. whose backyards are right on the other side of that property line.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to wrap this up, guys. Please join us again anytime, but certainly next time we're on this subject. And unless there's a council burning question, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn.
Just before we go, do you need anything else from us? All right. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, we are adjourned. Thank you all again for coming.